There are many great aspects to the process of writing these videos. There's something extraordinary about the initial idea. Of course, I also love the writing itself. It's always a revealing process. However, sometimes something truly unique happens. Something that delights all creatives. It's when you realize that one of your ideas and another would go together well, and you should meld the two. And that is just what happened in writing this video. I started with a video about the fascinating book Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. Van Neistat was how I first heard about Breakfast of Champions, and if it's good enough for Van, it's good enough for me. However, I was about 2 paragraphs in when I realized Breakfast of Champions had many thematic ties and ideas similar to the themes and concepts that HBO's The Last of Us is communicating. We will eventually get to The Last of Us, however we must start with Kurt Vonnegut's Breakfast of Champions, published in 1973. The story is about 2 people, 3 if you're counting Vonnegut. One is Dwayne Hoover, a businessman mostly known for his Pontiac dealership. Another is Kilgore Trout, a writer who sells science fiction stories to a pornographic magazine. Hoover, however, is losing his mind when he meets Trout. He reads one of Trout's science fiction tales and believes it is true. The story he reads hypothesizes that all people are robots. Vonnegut's Breakfast of Champions demonstrates his understanding of the writer's power over the world of their story. The writer, in a sense, is the god overseeing their creation. In Breakfast of Champions, 2 creators are actively referenced throughout the text. Those creators are Vonnegut himself, the creator of the fictional characters we follow and controller of the world around them, and what he refers to as the creator of the universe. In the comparison between himself and God, we see Vonnegut taking advantage of his control over the story. The fantastic thing about writing is how free from limitation it is. Vonnegut takes all the little lies and hypocrisies, the tiny bits of cultural programming that we humans take for granted, and exposes them for what they are. In the book, he shows his genius in the witty and irreverent fashion of treating his readers as if they know nothing. He tells the reader that the real world is stranger than any fiction he could create. It almost feels as if we are in one of Kilgore Trout's beautifully twisted science fiction and fantasy tales, which Vonnegut summarizes to us throughout the novel. Here is Vonnegut's summation of the story that would cause Hoover to lose his mind. He writes, "Here is the core of the bad ideas which Trout gave to Dwayne. Everybody on Earth was a robot, with one exception, Dwayne Hoover. Of all the creatures in the universe, only Dwayne was thinking and feeling and worrying and planning and so on. Nobody else knew what pain was. Nobody else had any choices to make. Everybody else was a fully automatic machine, whose purpose was to stimulate Dwayne. Dwayne was a new type of creature being tested by the creator of the universe. Only Dwayne Hoover had free will." End quote. While this idea sounds like a far-fetched one, once Vonnegut shines a light on how absurd our reality really is, the comparison between humans and robots becomes less unreal. Our 2 perspectives in the story are from a man losing his grip on reality, Hoover, and a voice that is not entirely dissimilar to Vonnegut himself. This is the voice of Kilgore Trout, a writer who sees the world clearly, but through a creative lens. As Vonnegut tells you the story, he informs you of his definitions of things and ideas. Vonnegut's satire is poignant because his work questions the root of our understanding. By changing how we define something, he is changing how we see everything related to it. Take, for example, how Vonnegut defines America. He writes, 1942. The teachers told the children that this was when their continent was discovered by human beings. Actually, millions of human beings were already living full and imaginative lives on the continent in 1492. That was simply the year which sea pirates began to cheat and rob and kill them. End quote. However, America is not the only thing Vonnegut defines for his readers in this book. Take his explanation of the insanity that Dwayne Hoover will fall victim to. Dwayne's incipient insanity was mainly a matter of chemicals. Dwayne Hoover's body was manufacturing certain chemicals which unbalanced his mind. But Dwayne, like all novice lunatics, needed some bad ideas too, so that his craziness would have shape and direction. Bad chemicals and bad ideas were the yin and yang of madness. Yin and yang were Chinese symbols of harmony. They looked like this. The book could quickly begin to feel preachy if the intellect and intention behind these sections needed to be improved. However, there is always a seed of truth at the core of Vonnegut's writing, no matter how absurd it gets. It's just more entertaining for him to give his readers a funhouse mirror reflection of the planet we find ourselves on. While the characters are made up, the details that make the novel so genius are the details of how absurd he is showing our world to be. All the institutions that run our lives are created by man, and Vonnegut does not hold human nature in a very high regard. However, Breakfast of Champions' themes concerning human nature are nearly identical to The Last of Us. The show is helmed by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann. Mazin's name might be familiar to you if you enjoyed HBO's Chernobyl, for he wrote the entire series himself. Neil Druckmann is the co-president of Naughty Dog Games, a company for which he co-created the video game version of The Last of Us. The show follows Joel and Ellie 20 years after a zombie outbreak wipes out a considerable portion of the Earth's population. Joel is an emotionally shut-off smuggler whose daughter died on Outbreak Day. Ellie is a 14-year-old girl immune to the zombie virus, and Joel has been tasked with transporting her to a lab to work on a cure. Craig Mazin has said on many occasions that the show's central theme is the dark side of love. In most forms of entertainment media, love is shown to be a beautiful aspect of the human experience. However, it is also a pre-programmed aspect of our human nature that we have no control over. Mazin details how love affects human nature in a recent interview he did with Vulture. Quote, "It is certainly by design, getting to this thing about us that we don't like to acknowledge, which is that we're not rational. Neither our will nor our optimism is rational. We just think they are. Ellie says to David, 'You're an animal.' And he says, 'We all are. That's sort of the point. Bingo. We're just really smart monkeys. We behave in a way that is sub-rational. We are inventing rationality to account for irrationality." End quote. The storytellers in charge of the show are interested in examining love, a thing that people naturally do, and looking at its dark side. Joel is a character who is plagued with fear and grief. He grieves the daughter he lost and fears losing Ellie as they become closer to one another. The two things that make his life painful are both the result of love. Love for Sarah and eventually love for Ellie. However, this does not just concern the character of Joel. Every person who could be considered one of the show's villains has airtight reasons why they need to do the wrong things they are doing. And at the core of each is love. Kathleen is hunting down our main characters because they are helping the character Henry. Kathleen wants to kill Henry, driven by the love she had for her brother, whom she lost when Henry gave him over to Fedra. Henry caused the death of Kathleen's brother because he loved his brother. In return for the information he gave to Fedra about Kathleen's brother, he was given medicine to treat his brother, who had leukemia. The dark side of love and human nature, or bad chemicals as Vonnegut likes to put it, is shown through the morally fraught lengths we will go to for the safety and well-being of those we love. Joel is Ellie's protector and has taken countless lives to ensure she is safe. He knows he cannot live with himself if he lets another daughter of his die. In the finale, to show how far Ellie and Joel's relationship has come, Joel admits to trying to take his own life after Sarah died. At the beginning of the story, he views Ellie as a job. He will be compensated for protecting her. Then, as he grows closer to her, he does it because it's right, and we start seeing his humanity as he warms up to Ellie. And long before he can admit it to himself, he is killing others because he loves Ellie. Human nature makes him love so thoroughly that it drives him to value Ellie's life over multiple others. We are repeatedly shown what can happen to people when those they love die. Joel might as well be dead at the beginning of the story because of how shut off he is from the rest of the world. The character Bill is so entirely in love with Frank that he sees no purpose in continuing on with his own life if Frank isn't there to share it with him. Henry's love and need to protect his brother keeps him going. Once his brother dies, he takes his own life. Joel is being shown again and again that he needs Ellie and that losing her would be fatal. What makes the creators of the show and the game so genius is how his worst fear is turned into an impossible dilemma. In the finale, it is revealed that people can only use Ellie's immunity to possibly make a cure by killing her and extracting part of her brain. Let Ellie die so they can make humans immune to the zombie infection, or kill innocent people? This is the impossible question that Joel has to answer, and it's his irrational love that causes him to kill countless innocent people to save Ellie. In fact, the people are more than innocent. They are part of the resistance trying to free people from a fascistic force and stop the infection from spreading. The point that the show is making is that the love we feel for those around us is why our society crumbles. Humans don't think logically. At all people's core is the desire to survive and protect those they love, even when it's the most selfish, illogical thing to do. These two stories contain analogies for how illogical and flawed human nature and love can make us. In Breakfast of Champions, Vonnegut compares humans to robots. In The Last of Us, the creators compare humans to zombies. They both go about this by showing how violent and evil human beings can be when pushed. Here's how Vonnegut describes this idea in the opening of the novel. This comes after he establishes that the discovery of America was no more than sea pirates stealing land. Quote, "Actually, the sea pirates who had most to do with the creation of the new government owned human slaves. They used human beings for machinery, and, even after slavery was eliminated because it was so embarrassing, they and their descendants continued to think of ordinary human beings as machines." End quote. He establishes the cold and terrible logic of those who consider other people to be lacking in humanity, and shows it to be at the root of American history. More about America later. How is our pre-programmed need to protect who we love any different from a robot's programming? Are we humans any nobler than the infected in The Last of Us? Both are driven by the need to survive and multiply. Is love any different than the cordyceps controlling the zombies? While these share a thematic thread, they are also both profoundly American stories. While Breakfast of Champions makes its concern with America clear textually, The Last of Us does it more subtly. Of course, this section from the show's title sequence shows the outline of America made up of the fungus that causes the zombie infection. The intro connects many images to the cordyceps fungus, making them look like the buildings of the multiple cities Joel and Ellie pass through on their journey. Finally, two far-off fungi appear to represent Joel and Ellie. While outside of the fungi map of the US, the rest of the imagery means that the infection and its effect on society stands as an allegory for the society we currently live in, but the creators wanted to push the viewer's focus towards America. Being an American can feel very conflicting and confusing today. The last few years have been ones of radical change in every American institution, and the show gives us allegories for many of these institutions. It explores how helpless average citizens can feel underneath their government in times of crisis, something the pandemic made it hugely relatable to most people. While the governing force, Fedra, is shown to be nearly fascistic in their rule, their clashing with the Fireflies feels all too familiar in a time where both our American political parties are more divided than ever. The show's thoughts on American politics can be viewed through what the different leaders of groups in the show desire. As we mentioned before, one of the season's most prominent villains is Kathleen, who takes over the Kansas City quarantine zone. While her brother initially led the resistance before he was ratted out to Fedra and killed, once in power, Kathleen ignores pressing matters to hunt down and kill Henry, who ratted out her brother. Our irrational love and all the fear and anger that comes with it is what guides Kathleen, and therefore all her people. This of course leads to disaster, with the threats she ignored taking out a massive portion of her people, including herself. In the same way that greedy, flawed people manipulate the government to their advantage, religion is also portrayed as a tool used to control the fearful. This is shown through the most despicable character in the show, David. He is a pastor who uses religion to comfort his people. However, when his true nature is shown, he is revealed to be manipulative and has disgusting goals. To return to Breakfast of Champions, I think the most essential character to this idea of human nature and love is Kilgore Trout, the sci-fi author. While he is underappreciated by society, he is shown to have a significant influence over people through the ideas presented in his stories. Through his writing ability and insight, his stories can make people question how they see the reality presented to them. In a career flush with absurdity, I believe Vonnegut is arguing for its importance in this novel. Trout is the only character to fully understand the world around him, and he does so through a filter of the strange and outlandish, most likely similar to how Vonnegut views the world himself. What Vonnegut and the creators of The Last of Us are trying to communicate is that most of the time, the real world is much stranger than the most unfamiliar realities that fiction presents to us. In a novel where understanding the world around you is the central conflict within one of our main characters, truth is found in the most humble and unlikely places. There's a scene partway through the book where Trout is in the bathroom of an adult movie theater when he sees written on the wall a question: what is the purpose of life? Vonnegut writes, Trout plundered his pockets for a pen or pencil. He had an answer to the question, but he had nothing to write it with, not even a burnt match. So he left the question unanswered. But here is what he would have written if he had found anything to write with. To be the eyes and ears and conscience of the creator of the universe, you fool.